economic digest. I take it from looking at those pictures of protesting going on that most of that oil money is not going to the people who are feeling the pain there.
I think, I mean, firstly, we have to hope that the violence ends very soon in Libya and we see an end to these terrible scenes. Clearly, there is enormous amount of frustration. The Libyans have, they understand their country's natural wealth and they don't see any benefit on the ground. The Libyan government have announced enormous investment projects steering this oil revenue into infrastructure projects, industrial projects, job creation schemes. But the reality is none of this has happened yet, and there are many reasons for that. These are to do with bureaucracy, to do with decision-making processes not happening quickly, to do with corruption, to do with inefficiencies. And I think we have a real disconnect between promises and what the reality is on the ground.
Some of the leaked US diplomatic cables leaked by WikiLeaks spoke of the possibility that there's some deliberate policy of not investing in development in the east of the country. Do you think that's the case, and is that what's prompting perhaps more protests in the east?
I think there has long been political and economic disparity between the East and the West. The current regime of Muammar Gaddafi, his power base is in the west of the country, in the Tripoli area. And Benghazi has certainly suffered during the 40 years of the Gaddafi regime. Whether there is a deliberate policy to invest in one side over the other, it's difficult to prove from our perspective. But certainly there have been protests before in Benghazi, and the people in Benghazi feel disenfranchised.
The fact that Libya does have such a substantial sovereign wealth fund, how is that playing out in international reaction?
Well, the Libyan Sovereign Wealth Fund has made enormous investments overseas, in Europe, in oil companies overseas, in real estate overseas. It's also invested in Libya itself, particularly in the real estate sector. There has been considerable progress since the lifting of sanctions in 2004 in investment and attracting investment into real estate in Libya. But I think for people in Libya, as we can see, there is a great deal of frustration about the lack of jobs, the lack of opportunity, poor infrastructure. They can't understand why the wealth doesn't trickle down more quickly.
All right, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for your thoughts on that issue. Well, people in Bahrain are once again protesting in the capital Manama after the government ordered the military to withdraw from Pearl Roundabout. Demonstrators rose early on Sunday morning to start another day of protests. At least 6 people were killed when security forces opened fire on demonstrators on Thursday. The government has offered talks, but opposition groups are calling for a nationwide strike. Well, let's go live to our correspondent, James Bays, who's standing by for us in the capital, Manama. James, maybe a bit of a party mood, it seems, behind you there. But as the mood softens, are the demands, in fact, getting tougher?
Well, I think it depends who you talk to, and I'm detecting a little bit of a disconnect between some of the opposition politicians and some of the people you speak out to there. Among the mass of people, some who stayed here all night, they're determined not to surrender this Pearl Roundabout again. Opposition politicians talking about constitutional reform, many of these people talking about the king leaving and going for good and a complete change for this country. Let's speak to someone who was involved in one of these protests a short time ago, because we had a lawyers' protest came here from the centre of the city to the Pearl Roundabout. One of the most prominent lawyers in Bahrain joins me now, constitutional expert as well, Hassan Ali Radhi. Can you tell me first, what do the lawyers want?
Well, you will see a lot of extreme slogans just because of anger, but the core of the problem is the constitutional situation, the constitutional right, the right of people in contribution and ruling themselves, their countries, command on the wealth of the country, the lands, because this is really the core of the problem. So people really are after having a constitution laid down by a constitutional, an elected authority, a council or a committee to draft a constitution which maintains democracy, real democracy, but the real demand is a royal democracy.
But some people who are watching the events in Bahrain might say this isn't the same as some of the other countries in the Arab world which have autocratic regimes. You already have elections here in Bahrain. What's wrong with the current democracy you have?
Well, in a brief, the constitution as it is now does not provide any democracy. It is two chambers, one fully elected and one fully appointed by the king, and they are equal in authorities and legislation. And when there is a difference between the two chambers, they meet in one Congress, which is presided by the president of the appointed chamber. That means he is an appointed person. In case of deadlock, he has got the casting vote. So this turn the democracy does not exist.
So in other words, the government in the end have the final veto. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Al-Radhi, here on Al Jazeera, where crowds continue to gather here in the Pearl Roundabout, Sami. We're expecting more people to gather. If previous afternoons before the crackdown are anything to go by, the crowds tend to get to their height in the early evening.
Well, we'll see what happens next. James Bays, thanks for that update. Well, there have been anti-government protests too in Yemen, outside Sanaa's university. And in another development, there are reports that the leader of South Yemen's independence movement has been arrested. From the capital, Al Jazeera's Hashim Ahlabarra has them all.
The fear of the ruling party and the elite here in Yemen is that the secessionist movement could take advantage of the situation here in the capital and move the bar a bit higher, asking not only for the South to join the pro-democracy momentum, but to say this is time for us to start thinking about our future and a new Southern Republic. However, most of the leadership of the secessionist movement is trying to distance itself from that call for pro-independence. They're trying to say that we are part of this general atmosphere of radical change. We are here to say and to make it clear that we will continue our fight with the Northerners, with every Yemeni, to see President Ali Abdullah Saleh go and a new atmosphere, a new era usher in here in the Yemen.
Iranian state television news has issued a warning against opposition rallies to be held on Sunday. Messages posted on social media site Twitter say internet access has been restricted and there's a heavy police presence.